So welcome to our webinar, which is about the navigating a candidate market. And we all know how difficult it is at the moment to find great candidates. And so we had a chat about the 4 golden rules that we use when we're recruiting in a candidate market. So we will have this recorded, and we'll also have a fact sheet that will be available after the event. And if you would like one of those at the end, we'll just give you details of how to get the fact sheet. So before we actually go on to our 4 golden rules, we just wanted to have a quick look at a snapshot of what a candidate market is. And obviously a candidate market is the fact that you've got more candidates than jobs. And that leads to increased hourly rates, as again, we all know. So what we found is that candidates are applying for multiple jobs because they can, basically, because there's an awful lot of jobs around. And we're also seeing a lot of applications from unsuitable candidates. And this means not only just unsuitable candidates who are maybe taking advantage of the market, thinking, well, you know, I don't really have the experience or the qualities, but I know people are desperate. But we're also seeing a lot of applications from fake candidates. And it's just something to be mindful of. For example, we had a number of CVs which we identified as being very similar CVs, and it looked as if they were all working for one particular care company. And when we looked into that care company, it wasn't actually a viable business. So again, just to be mindful that people do take advantage of an opportunity like this when there's a lack of candidates. So the other thing that we're finding in this market is that there's a very high dropout rate. So candidates are applying for jobs, but they are dropping out at all stages as well. And again, that all leads back to the fact that there are so many jobs around, they can kind of pick and choose. So these are our 4 golden rules that we're going to be discussing today. And hopefully these rules will just help in terms of when you're recruiting, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're working with a company like Snap. It will just help you in terms of thinking about these details. So the first one is clearly defining the job details, and it's never been more important. Acting swiftly, streamlining recruitment processes, and last but most definitely not least, is the job viable? So we will start with clearly defining the job details. Basically, if your job is difficult to understand, to read, the candidate, will just move on to the next job because there are so many to choose from. So it's almost a bit like when we meet somebody, we have like 3 seconds or something to actually decide whether we like this person or not. And it's almost a bit the same with candidates. They're looking at so many jobs online that they can look at a job and go, do I like it? No, move on to the next one. So unless it grabs their attention and it's very clear and everything is really clearly defined, they will just move on. So I've broken this down into 3 aspects. How much will I be paid? What are the hours and days? And basically, what will I be doing? So these are the things that the candidates will be immediately looking for. So unfortunately, we have put that one first because whether we like it or not, that is obviously very key, how much the candidate is going to be paid. And this sounds fairly straightforward, doesn't it? It's kind of like, well, I just put the hourly rate, or I just, say how much it is. But it does need a level of detail. So for example, have you stated the annual salary? If you've got a rota that is variable, so it's a mixture of on-call nights and weekends and weekdays, are you able to work out the actual salary? Because the candidate won't even have the time or won't spend the time to work out the annual salary. So you do need to do that for them and make sure it's very clearly stated. And also, have you qualified a wage range? So if you've put on the wage range 14 to 16, what does that mean? What does that person have to actually have to be able to get to the highest wage bracket? Because to be honest, that's what they'll be interested in. So perks, if you have any perks, please put them in, please mention them. And it doesn't need to be a financial one. Obviously, financial ones like loyalty bonuses are great. But other perks, which we won't always even consider of perks, are things like training opportunities. And the more detail you can go into what that training is, the more attractive that will be, because training is a huge perk to candidates. But it might also be personal use of a car, meals provided on duty, excellent care facilities, a car space so they can park their car. Just try and be creative about the kind of the perks that you can offer to sort of help that job stand out. The last one I put on there is optional international travel. Some people will see this as a perk, and some people will definitely not see it as a perk. And I have personal experience of this in both camps. So I've been in one job many years ago where it was a fantastic perk. We went to some really exotic locations, and another occasion where it was definitely not a perk. It was very hard work, extremely long hours away from my friends and my family. So optional international travel is much better.
Yeah, and often when people are taking people abroad with them, it's so that they can have a holiday. Yes, so you're aware that you will be working 12, possibly more hours a day. Maybe you get a few hours off, but you could be 12 days and you're working.
Yeah. But for somebody who, you know, who hasn't traveled or loves traveling, that can be a perk. But if you put the optional in there, then at least people kind of go, good, I don't have to do it, but I want to, sort of thing. So the next thing that they will want to know are that what are the hours and the days? And again, you know, it seems relatively straightforward, but you have to keep it as simple and as consistent as possible. And apologies if there is a case manager here who has actually forwarded those proposed hours, because they are actual hours that we had. And well, I don't know about just question marks. I think actually it would give somebody a complete headache to try and work that out. They're just not going to be interested. You can't possibly see what you would be working from that. So you need to keep them as simple and as consistent as possible before they flick on to the next job. So what about also if they actually were looking at this? So this role is offering an average of 36 hours a week on a 2-week rota. It includes a mixture of days, on-call nights, weekends and weekdays. Hours can be flexible for the right candidate. They don't know, how much am I going to earn? I don't know how much I'm going to earn, because there's a different rate for weekends, there's a different rate for nights, for days. How many weekends would I have free? There's too many questions, basically. They're not going to be bothered to kind of actually hang around and ask you those questions. They will just move on. Hours can be flexible for the right candidate. So there's 2 things there. Don't put in flexibility. Don't put in vague flexibility, because candidates are looking for certainty and clarity. People think, and it's sort of counterintuitive, you think the more open I'll be, the more candidates I'll get, because, well, I'll just reach so many more people. But it doesn't work that way. It works absolutely the opposite way. So the more open it is, the less candidates we see applying, because people want to know exactly what it is. And that little sentence in there, for the right candidate, are you going to employ the wrong candidate? I don't think so. So I would never put that sentence into a job advert, because, yes, that's just not relevant. So what will I be doing? Try and avoid generic descriptions and describe really what they'll be doing on the day and give a sense of the client, because that's what they're going to be looking for. So our great candidates are going to want to look at a job and go, oh, I could see myself working with this client. I really can understand this client. I really get this client. I can see what that job would be. I can see myself doing that job. That's where you want to get to. So sort of bog standard kind of sentences like enabling the client to access the community tells them nothing, tells them absolutely nothing. And it is something that is, you know, we've all been guilty of it, because it's a kind of a standard sort of thing. But actually, what does it mean, really? You know, what you should be saying is, you know, taking this client down to, you know, his judo lessons, or accompanying him to so he can meet his mates at the pub. It's that sort of thing that will give that that job description an added kind of value, so the candidate goes, yeah, that sounds like my kind of job. So we've looked at all of those, and these are the detail. These are the things that need to be defined, and these are details that shouldn't change at any point. So when we're working with a case manager, or a private client, we are going to go to quite a lot of detail to basically say, okay, tell us what you're looking for, tell us all of the details. And there should be no surprises at any stage, so no changes. So if you're calling, doing a first call to a candidate, they've applied for a job and it's for a Thursday and a Friday night, but actually you've just spoken to your client, said, oh, actually, really the Saturday night would be much, much better. And you speak to the candidate and say, oh, look, I know you applied for this job, but actually, would you be open to doing a Saturday? Already they're going to be nervous. They're going, okay, they've advertised this, they're changing things already. And the further you go along the recruitment process, the harder it's going to get and the worse it's going to get and the more catastrophic the results are going to be. You could get somebody right onto onboarding and go, oh, by the way, did I tell you that actually, although it's £16 an hour, for the first six months you're on probation and you're getting 14. Okay, bye. You've just lost that candidate. And if we're not in a candidate market, there aren't many jobs around, then maybe you wouldn't lose that candidate because they're thinking, oh, there's not that many jobs around. Well, that's not ideal. But if they know there's loads and loads of jobs around, they're going to go, not interested. Okay, I'm out of here. So it could be changes in anything, duties, hours. So always make sure that all of the details are right from the beginning. So the next point, the next golden rule, which is a very quick one, literally and metaphorically, is act quickly, act swiftly. That's it. Basically, don't hang around, because it's always important to respond to people who have applied to jobs quickly. But in this market, if you leave it 1 or 2 days when a candidate has applied and you think, well, I'll call them, they've applied on the Wednesday, so I'm a bit busy on Thursday and I'm not in on Friday, so I'll call them Monday. You've probably lost that candidate. That candidate is going to be applying for lots of jobs. So some of those other people may have already responded to your candidate. They may have already scheduled some interviews. And the candidate's going to think, well, they're not that interested in me. They didn't call me back. So I'll go with the people who sounded really interested in me, who called me back straight away. So fairly straightforward, simple one, that one. So the next one is streamline your recruitment processes. If you have an amazing job, so we've had a job, for example, which is with a private client, it's paying a huge amount of money. It's like £70,000 or something. And we can get candidates to jump through hoops. We can say, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to provide a supporting statement, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And they'll do it because it's an in-demand job. But the most of the jobs that we recruit for are not like that. They're fairly standard kind of jobs. So if you ask the candidate to do too much before they even apply, you'll have lost them, because you go, okay, to apply for this job, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do this. Oh, and then I've got to do this. You'll have just lost them, basically. So try and review your processes and think, do I need all of the steps that I've got here? Am I duplicating anything? I know, let's talk to Snap and let's make sure that Snap aren't doing something that we're also doing. Let's make sure that we're not doubling up here, because the candidate's going to get annoyed. Well, actually, Snap have already checked my references. Okay, or this or whatever it's going to be. So just make sure there's no duplication there. And just have a little think about what processes could come after they show interest. So if you front load everything, which is what we call it, if you front load everything, you're going to reduce the number of people that actually apply for your job. So you want to basically get people on board, you want to get them interested, you want to then talk to them about your client and about your job, and then say, great, we're really interested in you. Now this is what we would need you to do. And have you explained what the candidate needs to do and provided a timeline? And this goes back to our acting promptly. It needs prompting on everything, move swiftly, on everything, about kind of when you're going to speak to them, when you're going to arrange interviews, when you're going to arrange trials, shadow shifts. The longer the time is in between, the more chance you have of candidate dropout. So last but not least, is the job viable? And we know that case managers know what a viable job is, an attractive job is. We all do. And we know that also as case managers, you're kind of in between you and the client and us. And we'll push back and we'll say, oh, that's going to be really difficult to recruit for. And we hear these things, kind of like, these are the shift patterns that work well with the current team. And this is what the client wants. This is what the client has spoken to us about. And the problem is that can be a short-term view, because if it's working well at the moment, that's fine. But what happens in the future? What happens if that candidate then leaves? They take on a job and those are the hours, but then they leave. You've got to then recruit for a very difficult shift pattern or whatever it is. So it's always good to really look at the viability of a job and try and get it as viable as possible. I hope there's not a really bad sound in the background, because I've got absolutely torrential rain. So I hope it's not interrupting.
No, it's not picking up.
Oh, good. No. Hopefully it's screening it out. I might be swimming in a minute. So what case managers sometimes ask us is say, well, can we just start with these details, see how it goes, and then change it if we don't get any response. Now the problem is candidates know jobs. So candidates will go, oh, hang on a minute, I've seen this job in SW14 before. They must be having trouble finding somebody. Or, oh, it looks like they've changed the job, the wage. So, okay, they were trying to basically get somebody on the cheap before. It doesn't work. People will either dismiss it because they think, oh, I read that one, wasn't interested, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't work that way. So it really is much better to have everything as it should be from the beginning. And we know it's difficult, and we know there's challenges and hurdles. And so these are the main, what we would say makes or doesn't make a viable job. And we know that case managers won't agree with this one, because we know some case managers love blended rotas so that people can cover shifts and do those things. But fundamentally, candidates either want to work days or nights. They don't want a mix of it. And if you can imagine, if you were doing days or nights, it's actually incredibly disruptive to your life, because your sleep patterns are all over the place. It's not necessarily best for the client, because they're getting somebody who's quite tired. Gosh, it really is so noisy here. Is the sound okay still?
No, it's absolutely
Perfect,
fine.
Sally,
amazing. Yeah. Okay, great. I almost feel like I want to show you actually what's going on in the background, but I won't. So yes, mixing days and nights is just really not great, unless you're doing obviously a sleeping night where someone is genuinely asleep at night because maybe they're doing 4 days on, 4 days off. No problem with that at all. But generally speaking, avoid mixing days and nights. I know one of the things that case managers sometimes say, or clients sometimes say to us, is we really like people to have a mix, because we want them to cover other people's shifts, or we want them to get to know the client. So if you're only doing night shifts, they don't really get to know the client. We would always recommend that you can do some day shifts, but do them well away from the actual job. So maybe on a Saturday, they come in and do a morning with the client. So they get to see the client when he or she is awake, and they get to know the client. So the other thing that we would say avoid is every Saturday and Sunday. People may say in all good intention, I can do every Saturday and Sunday. It's not a problem. That fits really well into my life. Generally speaking, it's not sustainable. It sometimes is, and sometimes you're lucky, but it is kind of luck. And generally speaking, it's not sustainable, because there's a wedding, because there's a barbecue, because there's something that kind of crops up, and actually they want to have a weekend, or it's part of a weekend off. It's much better to do a job share over a weekend if you can. So paying below the market rate, and we have a link on our website, which will be in the fact sheet, which has our recommended rates. Everybody knows that rates have gone up, and we have tried to keep our recommended rates within a reasonable rate, but everybody has to be realistic. And there is no point in advertising a job that is well below the market rate. You simply won't get any applications. If there really is that budgetary constraint and you can't raise the market rate at all, you have to look at other ways that you can then promote that job. And that may be that you are looking at other things like the perks that you can then add into that job that raise the value of that job. Or you lower your expectation about who you're going to recruit. And if you're looking for somebody who has experience or has qualifications, have a think about, okay, if I got somebody who was fabulous, who was reliable, who was a lovely person, who was honest, who was vibrant, who was all the things that you're looking for, energetic, could I train that? Could that person be trained up? Because there isn't a budget there for somebody who needs to have 2-3 years experience. And that really leads into the kind of essential criteria. If you have too many essential criteria on your checklist, I must have this, I must have that, I must have this. Every time you add an essential criteria, you're cutting down your pool of candidates that you can look at. And that pool is small. So you don't want to cut them down any more than you need to. So make sure that any essential criteria really is essential. And if it's not essential, put it into preferable. And yeah, because otherwise you're just going to reduce the pool of your candidates too much. So what also makes a job not viable is if you have too early or too late start or finish times. So I think it's always a good kind of rule of thumb is to kind of go, would I do this job? So if you want somebody to start 6:30 and then do a split shift and then come back at 11 and then, or come back at 2 and then work till 8, you know, would you do that job? Would most people do that job? No. And now if you're not in a candidate market, you might sort of get away with that because there's a, you know, there's a lack of jobs. People go, okay, not ideal, but you know, it's, I'll do it. But in a candidate market, they will just take one look at that job and kind of go, I don't need to do that because there are other jobs there that aren't actually, you know, having those kind of very early starts or very late finishes, or unrealistic kind of start times. And equally, if the shifts are too long or if they're too short. Too short is probably more of a problem than too long, because if people, especially if people are not paying for travel costs in between split shifts, the cost of travel now, if somebody is driving, is so high. So why would somebody actually want to go and do an hour and a half in the morning? It's just not viable. It's just not viable for somebody. So if you have got these split shifts or very short shifts, you've got to look at ways to make that more attractive and to make that more realistic for somebody. So inconsistent days and times. Again, if you have, you know, that you're working, you know, different hours on different days, as the example that we gave, it makes it really complicated. And people just go, no, let's just have a nice 9 to 5, Monday to Friday type of job. And then the last one there is basically a change in rota for a part-time role.
Which I've had recently.
Yes.
We've struggled with.
And again, apologies if that case manager is sitting in our virtual room. But if you have a job, which is, and Rachel will tell you more about the example she has, but if you have a job that is not full-time, so it might be almost full-time, 36 hours a week, it's a changing rota. So one week you work so many hours and another, so many days, and another week you work other days. That candidate cannot get another job to make a full-time job. And you might be really lucky to find somebody who wants to have just work 36 hours and they don't mind which days they work. Don't really mind if it's weekends, whether it's weekdays, changing days. They don't mind, they just want to work 36 hours. Let me tell you, in our small pool of candidates, we are now talking about a really minuscule number of candidates. So you're just reducing the number of candidates. So was that a similar example to yours, Rachel?
Yeah, so my example is they're offering, I mean, really part-time hours, 24 hours a week. It's a mixture of days and weekends, and they can't offer any consistent hours or days in the week. So just thinking about it, it's difficult for that person then to think if they can obviously find a second job to supplement their wages, especially if the rota is changing. It's a 4-weekly rota. But the difficulty is that they have a team of support workers already in place, already following this rota. So it's looking at how, how we can sort of move forward to sort of, make the appropriate changes to make that job more attractive, because obviously, listening to what Sally said, it's be very unlikely that that job's going to attract many candidates, if any. Obviously, we hope it will. But that's where the difficulty is, because obviously we don't want to accept the jobs that we know that are going to sort of set you up to fail.
Yes.
As well. We want to find, obviously, the right candidates for your clients.
And we know that there are hurdles that there's sometimes there are things that can't be got around. So for example, that with the rate, if the deputy has said that is it, that's the rate, go back to the deputy and say, okay, this is, we've heard now, that this is not, not going to achieve the objective. Is there any room for negotiation on the rate? But we know sometimes there isn't. And so then that's when I say you have to be creative.
Yeah,
and
but also, Sally, sorry, sometimes it's that case manager comes in to, takes on a new family, where, if somebody else has left, and they're also left with this, they have to come and try and manage this.
Yeah.
You guys do an amazing job, by the way. And, you're trying to manage the client's expectations. You're very aware of the money that your client, taken from your client. So there's it's difficult, but without being consistent and making it clear from the very beginning, it then makes your jobs harder, and obviously our job's very hard if you come to an agency.
And I think the thing is, as well, as you're right, Janet, is kind of like if the team is already established, the client or the client's parent is understandably very nervous about losing the people that they already have. And maybe those candidates have kind of cherry-picked the shifts that they want. And so you're left then with difficult shifts. So in an ideal situation, it's about having a conversation with the whole team to sort of say, okay, this is going to be the difficulty. We need to recruit another team member, but you can't obviously say you cherry-picked all the good shifts, so you need to share them. But basically, that is the kind of conversation that needs to be had, is that actually we need to manage this. So moving forward on a long-term basis, this is a good, solid team that we have here. Because if somebody's always feeling that they've got the rubbish shifts, they won't last. And I think that with all of these items that we've just talked about here, what you might get, as we talked about at the beginning, is that the problem isn't a lack of applicants, it's a lack of good applicants. So you might get people applying for these jobs who are okay, but they're not really great, for one thing, or they're applying and thinking, okay, well, this will do for me for now, but I know there's lots of other jobs, so I'll just wait until that perfect job comes up and I'll do this one in the meantime. So they're going to be keeping an eye on a job that doesn't actually have mixed days and nights every Saturday and Sunday, paying below the market rate, whatever the kind of criteria is. So we're always looking to try and find the long-term solution, not a quick fix. And that can be difficult because, as I say, the families say, oh, we don't want to rock the boat, we don't want to lose our kind of candidates. But I think having a conversation and trying to create a better rota for everybody is the way to kind of move forward if possible.
And adjusting to this current climate, we are still going through a pandemic, and so it's challenging for everybody. So we're having to be creative, and that old-fashioned saying, start as you mean to go on, and getting everything as clear as possible from the beginning. It will help us and help you guys find the right candidates, and the candidates who will want to stay. And we do forget that it is about the client. Point.
So it's kind of like early pain for sort of later gain is kind of that's how we like to think about it. And it won't always be a candidate market, of course. And we've been Snap has been going since 2001, and we always see waxing and waning different markets. let me tell you, there is never ever a time when you go, marvelous, we've got just enough jobs and just enough candidates. It doesn't happen. It's you know, it's choppy waters, whichever way you're looking at it. There's always one more than the other, and we always have to work together to actually find solutions to do it. Thank you for joining our webinar. I hope that was useful, and I hope it will help you navigate in this difficult candidate market. If you would like to have a copy of the fact sheet and a link to the recording, please just send us an email to info@snapcare.co.uk and we'll happily send that to you. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.